Svin defecated on Boris Grebenshchikov's doorstep. It's just one of the most amazing and weirdest performances I've ever seen. Hey, what's going on, guys? It's the Bansplaining guy here. So first things first, I'm not Ray Romano. I don't know how many of you actually thought I was, but sorry to disappoint, just an ordinary guy. And second of all, obviously, this is on Patreon. I'm not doing anything differently about the YouTube channel. I'm not turning it private or going commercial or whatever. You know, I'm still going to be posting those videos. This was just sort of a thought to do something extra. Every time I post a video, there's always tons of good comments, recommendations for more stuff to listen to. So I thought it would be fun to do sort of a more long-form, improvised video where I go back through old topics and bring some of those comments up. And in the future, you know, I might do all sorts of different topics here, just, the YouTube being a place where it's a actual documentary, and then here being a place where it's more of like a podcast, you know, something more improvised. Obviously, this video is free, but my thought is in the future, you know, you'll pay the small monthly fee and you'll get access to all the videos, probably about one per month. In any case, for this first video, I wanted to go back to Soviet rock, in part because it's fresh on my mind, and in part because there was so many good comments about it. And to celebrate, I got the one Russian beer I could find at my liquor store, BALTIKA. No idea if this is actually popular in Russia, but it says brewed in St. Petersburg, so not too bad. Kind of tastes like a Heineken. So, Soviet rock. If you haven't already, go check out the two videos on YouTube. There's a part 1 and a part 2. To give it a brief recap, I just never knew that there was much of a rock music scene in the Soviet Union. I just assumed that under communism, people weren't allowed to be in bands, or, you know, weren't allowed to especially be in punk bands or, you know, weird, subversive bands. And I was completely wrong about that. There was actually a huge music scene, particularly in the 80s around St. Petersburg and Moscow, but also in the countryside, you know, in Siberia. Arguably the most famous Russian punk band of all time is from Siberia. And needless to say, it was not easy to be a band in Russia. Two of the biggest problems were you could not make any money being a band. You couldn't sell records. You weren't supposed to make money touring, playing shows, selling tickets. You know, private enterprise wasn't allowed. And secondly, certain forms of speech were not really tolerated. You could get in trouble for being a little too weird or a little too out there. In any case, if you haven't watched those videos, go and check them out. And I'm going to sort of dive into some of the biggest comments from that video. So first off, in part 1, one of the biggest comments from Super Earthling Yamcha. Just want to point out, homosexuality wasn't illegal for the entire duration of the Soviet Union. It was explicitly decriminalized in the 1922 legal code because they believed workers had a right to do whatever they want in their personal life. It was made illegal by Stalin in 1934. So, yeah, that was my bad. I'm just going to come right out and say it. You know, when I said entire duration, it was just my surprise that it wasn't decriminalized until after the fall of the Soviet Union in 1993, actually, under Boris Yeltsin. Why was that surprising to me? I guess in part because, you know, we're taught that the Soviet Union was was not a Christian state. It was technically more left-wing. So I was a little surprised that they still outlawed homosexuality, which I just kind of always put on the religious right. In any case, I stand corrected on that. To dive into the history a little bit, after the Bolshevik Revolution, they threw out the entire old legal code in Russia in 1917. And when they finally wrote their own legal code in 1922, homosexuality was not one of the crimes on there. So this is totally true. It technically was legal for a handful of years there. But basically by the late 20s, it was becoming more persecuted. It was being treated as a mental illness. And as the commenter wrote, by the time Stalin was, into power in the 30s, it was illegal again. So next comment from Shepherd2213. When you talk about labor camps, you need to clarify that these are not gulags. These are ordinary prisons that were located all over the country, not just in Siberia. Most often musicians were taken to the army or a psychiatric clinic. The prison sentence was not for music, but for illegal commerce activities, like ticket sales. So yeah, this is also true. And another mistake of mine. When I was watching the Yuri Morozov documentary, he talks about how just for owning a banned book, he would get 3 years in the camp. And because he said the camps, I just kind of assumed that was a gulag. And what I later learned is that pretty much all Russian prisons today are work camps. They're known as corrective colonies. So that's more likely what he was referring to. The actual gulags were only under Stalin in the earlier part of the 20th century. And after he died in 1953, that whole era of mass incarceration and deplorable conditions and forced labor pretty much ended. They did still lock up some dissidents in these camps all the way until Perestroika or Glasnost in the late 80s. But it was much less common, and they're not supposed to be referred to as gulags anymore. So again, in my defense here, gulag is just a really fun word to say for English speakers, and you hear people say it all the time just to refer to any sort of politically oriented criminal sentence.
On the horizon, I see watchtowers and barbed wire. I think I've just discovered a gulag.
Well, what do you know? It actually was a gulag.
Okay, next, pronunciations in Russian. So Butter wrote, I just can't help but laugh after hearing you pronounce Svidi as sweetie. And Tiordrutsky, sorry, that's a hard word to say. He said, pronunciation of all the names and places is so funny. So about that first one, in my defense, here's what I do. I plug these words into Google Translate, and I click the icon.
Цветы.
So right here, it's telling me
Цветы.
Sviti. Did I get that wrong? I don't think I'm going to be able to just master the nuances of this language. So I'm just going to kind of roll with it. I'm going to keep rolling with it, too, for the rest of this video. So one other one, though, that I got a lot of heat for was for Victor Soy. But again, when I type this one in Google Translate.
Victor Tsoi.
Victor Soy.
Victor Tsoi.
Victor Tsoi. So I guess it's supposed to be Tsoi instead of soy. So I'll do that for the rest of this video. My apologies on that one. Tsoi. All right. So let's get into some actual music here. A couple users pointed out that there was really a huge jazz scene in the Soviet Union, and that this played a pretty crucial role in inspiring the rock scene as well. So Kalle Springer wrote, gotta mention that jazz was actually quite popular in the USSR from the 20s to the 40s. And then because of Stalin's post-war policies and the so-called fight against cosmopolitanism, such musical expressions were severely curtailed until Stalin's death in 1953. And then he goes on to explain how under Khrushchev, jazz started becoming really popular again. Mew So Guy recommended specifically listening to jazz rock ensemble Aresenal, a group that started in Moscow in late 73. And I went ahead and listened to some of their stuff. First, this song, Freedom Jazz Dance. Jazz guy. I don't really know how to critique it, but I thought that sounded pretty sweet. Another cool recording from theirs was Bolero from 1979. actually reminded me of Mahavishnu Orchestra, that jazz fusion group fronted by John McLaughlin from like the late 60s. So check that one out if you're into this. Also, another really important Soviet jazz band a couple people pointed out is Pop Mechanics. They actually got started in the 80s, so they're a little later than these guys. But I was really blown away listening to them. This record in particular called Live in France. Kind of has that really cool ambience. Reminds me of like Miles Davis in a silent way. And skipping ahead here, the track gets really interesting. It has lots of twists and turns. So yeah, definitely recommend listening to the whole thing. I don't want to play too much more and violate the fair use copyright laws. Okay, so next, the Automatic Satisifiers. I forgot who originally left this comment, but somebody pointed out that I really should have mentioned this band, and they're right, because this was actually literally the original Soviet punk band, at least as far as is commonly accepted. This is a band that started in Leningrad in 1979, and was part of the same group of friends as Viktor Tsoi, who would actually play bass with them from time to time. So this band was fronted by basically a madman. His name was Andrei Penal, but his nickname was Svin, or Swine in English. And despite the fact that he came from more of a cosmopolitan upper-class upbringing, his parents both worked in the ballet, he was just like a straight-up gutter punk. His entire outfit, just ripped clothes, safety pins, and whatnot, but also just huge drunk, did not shower, just... Anyway, let's play a quick video from them. So this is from 92, so obviously they're a little more polished here. So yeah, that gives you an idea what I'm talking about. Initially, the Automatic Satisifiers were denied entry to the Leningrad Rock Club, which really set them apart from the rest of the scene and forced them to be more like outsiders. And I'm imagining as a result, they had more of a contemptuous relationship with the other big Russian bands, because there's this story. I don't know how true this is, but from the book Punk in Russia, I'm going to read. Punk legend has it that on one occasion, Svin defecated on Boris Grebenshchikov's doorstep. Boris Grebenshchikov was the guy from Aquarium, pretty much the biggest band in Leningrad at the time. When the leader of Aquarium called the police, the story goes, Svin simply picked up the stool in his hands and quietly left the premises, while the amazed policemen, who did not want any man carrying shit in their car, looked on. So, that's Svin. That's the Automatic Satisifiers. So, another super requested band was Nautilus Pompilius. This user with a Russian name writes, "Where is Nautilus Pompilius? Best Soviet band in the 80s." And Sat8 writes, "I'm surprised the video didn't mention Nautilus Pompilius, who were probably the second most popular band after KINO. They became huge even earlier with their 1986 album, Razluka, which had a pack of bangers that you still hear on the radio today. But I'll recommend you listen to their more prog stuff." So yeah, this was a very big band in the 80s. Nautilus Pompilius, originally from Sverdlovsk, which I believe is considered Siberia. So yeah, the first album he recommended, Razluka, very 80s, very pop, very sort of campy. Wasn't totally my thing, at least not the first time I listened, but it is pretty cool. It is pretty wild and out there, pretty fun.
Если голос твой слышен, еще ты не спишь. Ты светишься бронзой, раздетое лето. Ты манишь на свет всех крылатых ночей, но не хочешь.
And the second album he recommended, that one was jived with me a bit more. Like he said, it's a bit more prog. It almost has a American football vibe at times. Very clean guitars, doing some noodly stuff. But there's also a lot of unexpected twists and turns. Next, Palfig54 writes, No Alliance? I really like this band. I came across them early in the research, and I lament not including them. Just had to keep it sort of limited to keep the video under 20 minutes. There was one song in particular that I really liked. I believe the English title for it is Give Fire. I especially love that synth tone. Kind of reminds me of a Gary Newman song, but a little more punk, a little more industrial. Another fun thing about this band is they have this video from like a Russian TV show in the late 80s. And it's just I just have to play it for you. I don't even know how to describe it. Basically, the first thing you notice is the synth player in the back, who is wearing like a Hawaiian shirt and a sailor cap and just has these sick 80s sunglasses and this big Mike Ditka mustache. Just looks like the wildest party guy. And then up front, the scener is just the complete opposite guy. He's wearing this, I don't even know what you call it. It's like a 19th century Navy Admiral outfit, and he has this stoic look on his face. And when they cut the shots of the audience, they're so taken in by the whole experience. It's just one of the most amazing and weirdest performances I've ever seen. On a TV show, nonetheless. But what's even more amazing is that this video is uploaded by that keyboardist. And it must be a big meme in Russia because it has like 5 million views. He's got a pretty popular channel, and I guess he interacts a lot with fans. He's got a really good sense of humor, and he seems like a really fun guy. So Alliance definitely seems like a cool band and someone I'd recommend listening to. And one more frequently requested band, Glasses Masses writes, Auktyon is my favorite band that came out of CCCP. They are still playing and have evolved to a much higher level since their beginning. Right below that, another user recommended the song Doroga. And yeah, this is a really cool song. You can just tell that they're a really tight band. They have some really cool melodies, really cool rhythms. And I also like that their scener, kind of breaks from the usual low baritone, monotone voice that you hear in a lot of Russian post-punk, and does some really wild stuff. Another song I came across by them is called Zima, which I believe is winter in English. You know, at first listen, I wasn't really crazy about this song and this style of music in general. I later pinpointed it as the time signature. It's a 5/4 time signature. 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 3 1 2, which apparently is very common in like traditional Russian folk music and Eastern European folk music in general. But honestly, after listening to it more, it's kind of grown on me, and I think it's really badass because it's basically this noise rock, insane punk song written in this traditional Russian wedding dance time signature. So what's there not to love about that? Okay, next. By far the most requested topic for me to cover more was Yegor Letov. Not going to be able to pronounce this commenter's name, but they wrote, "You really spoke not enough about Grazdanskaya Oborona. They were and still are the icon of the Russian punk and rock scene." Also, a number of people pointed out here, Letov didn't have a manager when he was locked up in the insane asylum, which is a story I'll explain again in a second. He didn't hand his music through the bars to his manager. It was his bandmate, Oleg, whose nickname was Manager, because he was sort of a smooth talker in the band who could get them out of trouble. He was like a trusted guy in the band. The other thing, too, that people pointed out is that GROB is just coffin in Russian. So no one says their band name as GROB. They say it as GrOb. And I actually I was aware of that, but I was just worried to pronounce it because...
GrOb. GrOb.
GrOb.
GrOb.
GrOb. There's just...
GrOb.
It just sounds like GrOb. It's really hard to pronounce. So I'll give it a try now. I'll say GrOb from now on. And while I'm at it, let me just confirm...
Yegor Letov.
Yegor Letov. Okay. So, yeah. Since it was so requested, I'm just going to go right into Yegor Letov's whole story. So buckle in. Because here we go. This is the story of Grazdanskaya Oborona. Yegor was born in Siberia under interesting circumstances. His father was a military man, his mother was a doctor, but right before he was born, they were living in an area of Kazakhstan that was used for nuclear tests. And as a result, him and his older brother both had a lot of health issues growing up. Yegor actually experienced what's called clinical death at age 12. That's when you stop breathing or your heart stops. But obviously, he survived. And by the time he was a young adult, his health was more under control. He moves to Moscow for university, and he gets his first taste of playing in a band. His brother is actually a pretty well-known jazz saxophonist, and the two of them get to join Pop Mechanics on stage. That's the jazz band I talked about a little while earlier. So while he only spent a little time in Moscow, he dropped out of school just a couple months later, but he got this pretty sick introduction into the music scene. So back with his parents in Siberia, he didn't really know what he wanted to do. He got a job painting at a factory, actually painting murals, like propaganda posters for all the workers to look at. And eventually he got together with his friends and just decided to form a band. And that band became GrOb, Grazdanskaya Oborona. So basically right away they recorded a couple albums. You know, I got a little grief for calling this stuff emo music, but I just to be clear, I wasn't referring to like My Chemical Romance. I was talking about like those early DC bands like Rites of Spring. So I don't know, maybe you hear it too, maybe you don't, but just wanted to clarify that. In any case, they played together for about 2 years. I don't think they really played out very much. I think it was mostly a recording project. Until one day when it stopped. And what happened is the mother of one of the band members overheard their music coming from the bedroom. And she was so horrified by what she heard that she basically reported them to the KGB. So you think your parents are shitty and unsupportive of your music. Just imagine what happened to these guys. Turned into a massive ordeal. They trumped up the allegations into accusing them of plotting to blow up an oil refinery or something crazy. And basically, the band members were either sent to join the Red Army, or in Igor Letov's case, he was sent to a mental institution. He, in protest of the whole ordeal, he sent them a letter saying, "Hey, I'm just going to kill myself. You go after me like this, I'm going to kill myself." And they used that as reason to confine him to a psychiatric hospital. Perhaps he was doing that in order to avoid going to the army, in which case you could call it a smart move, but it sounded like the psychiatric hospital was pretty awful. They filled him up with drugs, like really, really heavy antipsychotics. And it's very likely he would have been stuck there for a long time. But his older brother, who at this point was a pretty well-respected, jazz saxophonist, was able to get him out. He didn't storm the office of the local party official and demand his release. He just sort of told everyone in his circle about how shitty it was that his brother was stuck in this mental hospital, and eventually, since the word spread around about it, they kind of let him out. Anyway, after he got out of the hospital, there wasn't really a whole lot he could do because his former bandmates and basically all of his friends had to sign documents saying they wouldn't associate with him. So he was pretty much left on his own to perform solo for a while. However, after a couple years, he got together with this band, Peak Kloxen. And infamously, they recorded an album and played a festival under the name Adolf Hitler. So I know right when you hear that, you think, oh, God, oh, great, there's a white supremacist aspect to this. But not really. Basically, it was meant to be a critique of Soviet society by writing about this super authoritarian fascist government of the Nazi Party. You were supposed to see parallels to Soviet society and sort of critique inward. But unfortunately, most people who heard the music weren't looking that far into it, because literally there's a song where they just recite Mein Kampf over and over again.
Mein Kampf! Mein Kampf! Mein Kampf! Читайте Mein Kampf!
So yeah, this is a recording of that 1987 festival where they performed as Adolf Hitler. And mind you, this is right when the country was starting to open up. This festival happened in Siberia, so it was particularly still a conservative place. And the other thing, too, is that, you think Americans hate the Nazis, which obviously we do. In Russia, it's an especially sore topic. Something I learned through doing this video is they don't even call World War II World War II. They call it the Great Patriotic War. They lost some 27 million people, so they were completely devastated by the Nazi Party. And for them to go on stage and use that name, I don't think there's any white supremacist intention to it. I think it's just about trying to get under the skin of the authorities. Anyway, needless to say, they got kicked off the stage very fast, and they had to do a lot of smooth talking to not get arrested, immediately. Yegor basically hit the road for the next year to avoid getting arrested. He was worried about getting sent back to the mental institution. But if there's one positive thing that came out of that festival for him, he met Yanka. So this brings up another frequently requested topic. Jeff McDonald writes, why would you not even mention Yanka? Yanka lives. And Ava Palma writes, you could have mentioned Yanka Diagliva, a noise punk folkie who didn't last very long, but has some evocative songs in her discography. From the 1-minute lo-fi My Sorrow is Luminous to the epic 8-minute Priyat Voda. So Yanka, born Yana Diagliva, but nicknamed Yanka. Apparently just adding a K in there is sufficient for a Russian nickname. She was about 20 years old at this point when she met Yegor, and they became friends and started traveling together and touring together. They became partners, I should say, almost like husband and wife. But they weren't officially married, I don't think, and they both led pretty independent lives. So I checked out these songs, and both really good recommendations. I'm going to play My Sorrow is Luminous here.
Я повторяю 10 раз и снова. Никто не знает, как же мне хуёво. И телевизор с потолка свисает. И как хуёво мне никто не знает. Всё это до того подзаебало, что хочется опять начать сначала. Куплет печальный, он такой, что снова. Я повторяю, как же мне хуёво.
So yeah, definitely very interesting, very haunting stuff. Another song I came across that was really cool. I don't know how to pronounce this in Russian, but in English it's From a Big Mind.
От большого ума лишь с ума до тюрьма. От лихой головы лишь канавы и рвы. От красивой души только струпья.
A lot of unexpected sort of melodic shifts in there make it really cool to listen to, despite the fact that I don't know anything that she's saying. That's not clear already. I don't actually know Russian, but still definitely very powerful. And what also makes her story so powerful is the fact that she died so young in 1991 at just 24 years old. She had gone missing for several days out in the wilderness, and eventually her body turned up in a river. Some thought that she may have drowned accidentally, but others think that it may have been on purpose as a suicide, and others yet believe that she may have been murdered and then thrown into the river. So, you know, still something that's unsolved to this day. But back to Yegor Letov. So by the late 80s, he wasn't being pursued by the authorities anymore, despite his whole Adolf Hitler show. The country was really changing at this point. Glasnost and Perestroika was going on, which completely opened up opportunities for musicians. You know, they're able to release music commercially for the first time. They're able to actually start touring, you know, not just in underground venues, but they can actually sell tickets and make money. Around this time, GrOb was finally allowed into the Leningrad Rock Club, and they really had their popularity skyrocket. They also reached something of a creative peak. In '89, they released the album Russian Field of Experiments, which I thought was really cool, and apparently it was also one of Yegor's favorites. So let's give this one a listen.
Трогательным ножичком пытать свою плоть. Трогательным ножичком пытать свою плоть. До крови прищемить добровольные пальцы. Отважно смакуя леденцы на палочке. Целеустремленно набивать карманы. Мертвыми мышатами, живыми хуями, шоколадными конфетами и нерукотворными пиздюлями. На патриархальной свалке устаревших понятий.
Just really super doomy, super distorted and gritty. Now, for some reason, Yegor could never really sit still, And even though he had one of the most popular bands in the country, he had to start a side project. This one was called Communism, and they released literally, I think, 14 albums in a 2-year period. So I apologize, I did not dive into these. There was just so many to choose from. If you do have a recommendation, leave it below. Also, in 1990, he broke up GrOb, in part because they were so popular. He wanted to do something different. If you haven't gotten the hint already, this guy is a bit of a contrarian. So he forms a new band, which roughly translates to Yegor and the Fuck-Ups. But this is actually a pretty sweet band. A lot more psychedelic. I kind of compared it to the Elephant Six bands in the States, but obviously still, this is much more gritty, noise rocky, Russian. Really cool guitar stuff going on. Anyway, his career really took all these weird twists and turns. By 1993, he starts GrOb up again, but this time they are hardcore Bolsheviks. So even though in the 80s they were totally rallying against the Soviet Union and the authorities, this time they're embracing communism, they're embracing that ideology. Part of the reason for that was that the country was going through all this drama of converting to a capitalist economy. A lot of people believe that certain oligarchs stole a lot of the country's wealth and that people were cheated by politicians at this time. There was a lot of corruption going on. So joining the Bolshevik Party may have been his way of just being, again, a contrarian at any point in time. I did find a source saying that he was actually at the 1993 coup that took place.
Russia was in the middle of a constitutional crisis when the president, Boris Yeltsin, ordered the army to shell Moscow's White House, the building housing parliament, on October 4th, 1993. At the instigation of defiant lawmakers, Moscow had just witnessed the deadliest street fighting since the revolution of 1917.
I don't think they were there for the heavy stuff because they lived and they didn't spend the rest of their life in jail either. But the fact that they might have been there is pretty wild. Anyway, by the 2000s, Yegor had left the Communist Party and at this point claimed to be apolitical. He didn't belong to any specific political party. And he continued releasing albums up until the day he died, which was in 2008. There's conflicting reports about how he died. I read that it was cardiac arrest. I also read that it was respiratory failure due to alcohol poisoning. But yeah, he did die quite young at 43. He left a massive legacy. I mean, hugely popular still to this day. So many people on the video commenting that you have to write more about Yegor. Yegor Letov. Yegor Letov. I think that's it. Okay. Anyway, let's go to something a little lighter here. Zvezda 1981 recommended the Baltic artist, I'm going to butcher this, Dzeltenie Pastnieki. And even though this comment didn't get a lot of upvotes, the fact that he and I really both gelled on Vova Blue made me want to give this a try. And it's some really cool stuff. I'm going to play this song from 1981.
Noguris no veltīgām pūlēm, trijos naktī es padodos klusi.
It kind of has this monotone sing-talking that reminds me of The Fall. But these instrumentals are so slacker, almost like Mac DeMarco. And the commenter also recommended this song from 2003. I mean, kind of outside the era I was talking about, but very cool. Alright, next let's go to a comment from Billy the Kid. Great material. But please don't reduce the Soviet rock era to mere politics. Russia was under a more severe Tsar regime for centuries, not to mention that about 80% of the Russian population were slaves, in parentheses, serfs. And this was sort of in line with another comment I got, this one from a user whose name I will not be able to pronounce, but they write, "Life back then was not all about the gulag at all. On the contrary, life was easy, cheap, and the political machine went soft, so the youth was quick to rebel. Mostly for the fun of it. Like, you've got to fight for your right to party. Soviet utopia was about devaluing the power of money, so people didn't really care about it. It has never been a disadvantage or a benefactor for the Russian rock movement." So, I found these both to be really interesting and eye-opening comments. I think this is really what me and other non-Eastern Bloc viewers like to read, get a little more nuance about our understanding of the Soviet Union. My understanding about the government and censorship and persecution of rock music is that it just varied tremendously across the country. In certain places, you could get away with a lot more than others. And also, most people understood that in order to get away with something, you kind of had to cover it up a little bit or sweet talk your way out of it. I came across a story from Yuri of DDT. Apparently he was DJing at a dance club and was playing Satisfaction by the Rolling Stones when some party member happens to walk in, and this person comes up to him and says, "Hey, what is this song about?" And Yuri quickly comes up with some explanation. He's like, "Hey, this is about the working class man who is so upset by the pressures of the imperial capitalists. He moans, 'I can't get no satisfaction.'" And the party member buys it, and they're able to keep on partying. So, I don't know. I get the vibe there was a lot of sweet talking to get out of stuff. What I will say in response to this, though, in every documentary, book, magazine article, whatever, that I read about the music scene, and whether it was in English or Russian, right? So whether it was for an international audience or a domestic audience, every single band had a story about dealing with the authorities, dealing with censorship, dealing with getting shut down at a show, dealing with something worse than that. And, some of them did have fairly lighthearted stories. Some of them laughed about it. Others were more serious. But that does really stand out to an outsider. Like that, it seems like really crazy circumstances to start a band. And the fact that pretty much everyone's lives were totally structured by how to get around the censorship, how to get around the persecution. It makes it a pretty significant topic. On that note, though, I do find it really interesting to learn a little bit more about what everyday life was like for the people living through this stuff. So I did a little more research just to fulfill my own curiosity. One major perk to the economics of the Soviet Union, being a communist country, is that rent was incredibly cheap. So I found a New York Times article that said in 1974, a modest 2-bedroom apartment was 6 to 8 rubles per month. And in today's money, that's about $40 to $60 USD. On the other hand, there was also a shortage of apartments. So if you were a young adult, you might be living with your parents for a while. And sure enough, doing this research, there were a lot of bands who were living with their parents while they practiced and got their bands going. Another fascinating thing about the Soviet Union is that it was illegal not to have a job. So with the exception of housewives, seniors, and the disabled, you can't not have a job. They actually have a word for it. It's called social parasitism. It wasn't really enforced that often. Maybe if you were selling stuff on the black market and you got caught, or if you were a political dissident, they would use this against you as a way to charge you with a crime. But it was used at a few key points in history. Right before the Moscow Olympics, they rounded up a bunch of, homeless people, punks, and ne'er-do-wells, and use this law to put them in a jail or to force them to get a job. This definitely stood out to me as a key difference between the Soviet Union and America. You know, in America, if you want to start a band, you can quit your job, you can couch surf, you can live in your buddy's closet until you guys get some shows going and start making some money.
They said, hey, you know, there's a vocalist slot that has opened up. You kind of auditioned the other night, and I'm looking at my minimum wage job, or I can go to New York on an Amtrak train and audition for my favorite band.
In the Soviet Union, you could, I'm sure a lot of people did that, but it was harder to get away with it. And a lot of musicians would work menial jobs like being a night watchman or a furnace stoker or a handyman. And this would enable them to free up their days to do music and keep the police off their back, I suppose. One more critique here. Letesmig writes, "You keep mentioning how some music was known across the Eastern Bloc, but that was not the case. I am from Czechoslovakia, and we have never heard any Soviet alternative band. Unfortunately, anything Soviet was not cool, just because it was Soviet. Plus, it was much easier to acquire records from the West than it was from the Soviet Union." He goes on to say that he only discovered Victor Tsoi in the 1990s when he visited Russia. So, yeah, fair enough. That's really interesting for me to hear. Some of the sources I read would use that terminology that such and such band became popular all across the Eastern Bloc. But, you know, they probably weren't referring to every single country because they're all very different places. I mean, East Germany, you're talking about a very, very different language, you know, not even a Slavic language. So there's probably huge cultural differences between East Germany and Russia. But in the spirit of this comment, I thought it was only fair if I highlight some music from other Eastern Bloc countries. So the first one, which came recommended by a commenter, is Electric Orgasm from Serbia. I'm kind of just blown away by the quality of this recording. Those guitars just sound so sick. Also just love this kind of gain of 4 wire style punk sound. Not saying that they're copying them or whatever. I mean, just that's kind of how I categorize that style of punk. And another band I came across was Pauk from Bosnia. That's P-A-U-K. They just have this insane surf noise rock sound. Kind of reminds me of the OCs, but obviously we're talking 30 years earlier and a lot more badass. Anyway, moving on to another topic here. Now, in the video, I kind of closed out with this KINO song, Pack of Cigarettes. This was one of the first songs as I was researching that really resonated with me. Just such a doomy, depressing song in a great way. But I got a couple comments recommending other songs. 1 Second to Hell writes, "To me personally, Pack of Cigarettes is not the most depressing song of Tsoi. Good Night is. Maybe not in the lyrics, but sound design." And Hypothermia Q writes, "The saddest song of KINO is The Legend." So both these songs are really cool. I'm going to play both of them here.
Но настала пора, и тут уж кричи, не кричи. Лишь потом кто-то долго не сможет забыть. Но ночь сильнее, ее власть велика. Тем, кто ложится спать, спокойного сна.
Just a side note here, I couldn't help but notice how, like, Victor Soy is sort of a meme on the Russian internet. Or maybe not Soy specifically, but there's a meme about Russian doomer music. They use the, like, sad face meme to describe life in Russia. Whether that's true or not, it's pretty funny. And last but not least, somebody asked me to check out some modern Russian dark wave, including the band Молчат Дома. Right off the bat, I love this drum machine and these samples. And once the song kicks in, it's just so unsettling. It's kind of like death grips you. It's so unsettling. I mean, I find stuff like that really cool. Obviously, there's a specific mood for that, and it's not something that I'm just putting on when I have people over, unless I want to really weird them out. And yeah, that's going to wrap up the video. I hope by exploring some of these topics a little bit more, I satisfied everybody's itch. And if this is something you enjoyed and you want to hear more of, you can sign up for this Patreon, and that way you'll be guaranteed access to the next video. Also, let me know in the comments below. You know, I'm still kind of debating what to do with this, so I'm curious. What did you think of it? How'd you enjoy it? And also, you know, did you actually watch the thing, or were you just listening to the audio while you did the dishes or vacuumed? I kind of imagine this could be a podcast and not just a video that you had to watch. So if you listen to it rather than watching it, I can accommodate that in the future by making sure I describe what's going on in the crazy videos that I show you. But yeah, anyway, that's going to wrap it up. So thanks for, again, as always, thanks for watching, thanks for following, and hope you're excited about this new chapter for Bandsplaining. All right, I completely finished this BALTIKA, so now I got to find something else to drink. Cheers.